Hello, this is Max Drake. I just want to talk about. I'm going to be talking specifically about Python and doing some data cleaning, and based on some of these ones. This one today is really talking about. Let's just end up. Um, we've got things like date times, which are in these different formats. Now, this is from the same company, but they're on the same site. They end up having it structured in different ways, and I ended up having to come and clean this up. As I've gone through this particular project, I've ended up with a whole lot of things. And I want to tell the story of how I got here, and then I want to actually start dealing with small amounts of things and give small codes and the solutions that I actually came up with trying to do some of the things. So to begin with, I went into architecture, and then I was working, doing some data capturing for a whole load of existing buildings and stuff for asset management and stuff. So I got into buildings, and then I was extracting data from BIM models so that you could actually use it for asset management for buildings and things. I started to look at different things like exploring maps and getting data to be able to convey things and to do, and I actually got a couple of websites on that. And I sort of put it away, and I've actually been off doing other things. And I came back, and I came across this course, which is edX, and it was a free course. You can log in for free and do that. And some of the courses are for free, or if you actually wanted to get a certificate, you can actually upgrade and then do the things and do the homework and stuff. I was actually, but there's this one here on data science for construction, architecture, and engineering, and it's done by the National University of Singapore, and I was quite impressed with it. And it tends to be a high level, and it tends to do a bit of grazing over the top, but there are a few little exercises you do, and some of them you actually go into the Python fundamentals of how a loop works and this and that and the other and variables and blah 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 blah. Then you actually start getting into some pandas, and then when I started to do panda fundamentals and statistics and visualization, I suddenly thought this is seriously cool. And then my daughter came to me and she said, "Oh, do you know anything about APIs?" And she grows plants, and so they grow plants and sell them. And so she sort of says, and I said, "Well, why do you want APIs?" She said, "Well, she's got three different lots of data, and she wants to sort of try and match them. So she's got one thing which actually goes through, and you give each plant its own ID, and they move through the grow house in different stages, and and there's certain strains which are better than other ones, and you get healthier plants and things. So those are the better ones that you want to grow, and the ones that and are not as good, you actually want to try and get better attractive plants that you're going through. So and so as you're doing the growth cycle, you want to be able to analyze how the environment goes. So obviously you've got seasonal changes and things like that. You've also got things which are sensors of the humidity and the temperature in the rooms and how it actually goes through, and also one for how much watering they're getting, and fertilizers and stuff which are being added to them and things. And then you can start mapping them over time and comparing the plants against the environmental conditions that they're getting. And there's also another lot of sensors that they've got which will actually put, if there's too much sunlight, it'll actually put shade cloths in there. Or it's got automated shade cloths, and it can also add lighting, so you can actually add different frequency lightings for special grow lights and stuff, to supplement the day lighting and things, or if you need to shift that to a slightly longer lighting period and things. So there's things that you can do, but basically she had three lots of data: one about the plants, one for some of the sensors that they've got, and then other ones for the outside environmental conditions, and also for some of the shade cloths as well, so, and how they were reacting. And she wanted to be able to look through all of this data. So she said, "Well, what have we got?" So I've sort of been doing some data processing and things. So, and with this course, I thought, oh, the tool for that is to use pandas. So yes, I'd love to have her play with your toys. So she sort of gave me some data, and I started to explore the data. And the first lot of data that I could get, the only way that you could do that is you go onto the dashboard and you could make some queries inside the dashboard, and then you could download a CSV file. And depending on which area that it was looking at, the data came through with different timestamps. This one here comes through with the year, month, day, and then it's got a T, and then it's got the hour, minute thing, and then it's got the Z for the time zone type thing. So that's one way of coming through. Another one comes through with it like this. The year, day, and a month, and then it's got a gap, and then it's got hour, minute, second, and then it's got the time shift, and then it's got which particular region that you're in that is coming through, and then it's got these weird brackety things at the end. And then if you could see through here, another thing that's actually happening as well is here it's plus 12, and here it's plus 1300. And this is where we'd actually gone into daylight saving. So we'd gone into daylight saving, and what I actually found after doing some research and starting to play with the API is that although the sensors are here in New Zealand, because it's an international company that's offering this specialist software that's doing this recording, and each of them have different areas of what they do, and they normalise the data by bringing the data, whatever the data is. If somebody says, oh, that's from New Zealand, so we're going to shift it by 12 hours so that it's always at UTC or Universal Time or Greenwich Mean Time, where it's 0. And then if I have to suddenly saying I want to compare it against other ones in the US or something, and that's got a 4+4 time zone or -3 or so, you can shift, you can do your time zone shift. So everything seems to be shifted back. Then when you actually, and then they give these dashboards and stuff like that, and he says, oh, I'm going to a dashboard in New Zealand, so I've now got to shift everything back. So a lot of the times you get this time shifting all the time, so that it's actually normalised in their database, and then they just suddenly said, oh, there. So although it's actually recording there, they manipulate the data to put it back in again, and then they manipulate it again to give it back out onto the dashboards that you get. So we're dealing with that same data. So, but this is the one company that has actually got the data in 3 different formats. So that's okay. You know, it's got hour, minute, and it's all just numbers. You've got a couple of things you might have to strip out. That one there is in numbering generally all the way through. But then you've got this one here. So I've got Wednesday. I've got July instead of 7. I've then got GMT plus 12 or GMT plus 13. And then I've got this long string of stuff down here as well. Let's just get that back as to what it's doing through there. So how do you deal with that? Now, because you have a plant, and because you have a plant, and it's in different environments, so the environment isn't going to have an ID with it. So you've got to say, well, the plant was in this room on this date, and it's in this room on this date. So if you've got dates, you've got to be able to do date manipulation and say, well, they went in that day and it came in on this day and it went out on that day. You can say this date minus that day, so end date minus start date gives me 20 days or something like that. So once you've got days, and you can manipulate them, but as they're in this format, you can't do anything with them at all. So whereas I'd seen all this stuff on pandas and things, I was thinking, wow, this is cool. And I was doing this data manipulation in this course, just doing some stuff based on sensors and things for temperature and stuff inside the environment to see the performance and things. At the end of the day, the first time I actually go to do something, I can't, because I can't do any date manipulation. The first thing that I've got to do is take this dirty data and make it so that it's usable. And this is something that, fortunately, I was reasonably enthusiastic that I just carried on being as persistent as hell to do with it. The other thing is, inside there seems to be a massive amount of resources for Python that I think is really brilliant. So the Python and the Panda stuff is really good. Now, I didn't really have an understanding of how powerful Pandas is, and again, I think NumPy as well is quite powerful as well. But you know, I was blown away what it could do. Now, I would have before, when I was doing a lot of the stuff, when I was doing the asset management stuff, I was using databases and I was using Excel, and I wasn't really doing that much programming. But when I saw what you could do as far as its speed, it's all other things, I'd blown away with it. I was really, really impressed. So I suddenly thought, this is the tool that I want of choice, so let's get on and do some stuff. So when I actually looked at that, one of the things that I found was I wasn't that confident with the whole Python thing. So I don't think Python, I just think, oh, I can do little things. So I actually found every time I ended up with a problem, I'd go on to Stack Overflow or something, and I say, I've got this problem, how do I change the comma from one position to a slightly different position or something like that? Really trivial little things. So I ended up doing these little baby steps all the way through. So a lot of the times I tend to actually just put variables in for file names and things like that, so I can change it at one place at the top and it changes all the way through. So if I go and work on a different file, I can just change the file name at the top and I can change the header name at the top, so I don't have to go scrolling all the way down for all the rest of the stuff. Found it just works over time, and it's quite brilliant to do. That's one thing that I just want to highlight there at the beginning. So what I ended up doing, because I spent so much time on this, I ended up writing a function. So I got this function called clean timestamp, and you give it a whole lot of variables. Basically, you give it the file and you give it the columns and the things like that, and you say, right, go off and do magic. And the first thing it does is it reads the CSV file. So it's reading the file of whatever you've got, and the CSV file that we're going to deal with is this one here with these long dates through here. So when confronted like this, I suddenly thought, well, how would I deal with this normally? So I suddenly thought, well, actually, if I was in Excel, what I would actually do if I was using Google Sheets, I think there's a thing called split, where you can actually just say split on a gap or a space or something like that, and it just splits everything into separate cells, and then you just concatenate and join it up as you want. And if you're in Excel, you can go left 3, take the first 3 cells on the left and do that, or take a midpoint, so go to cell 6 and then do something. So I ended up with this long string through here, and I dealt with it as I did in Excel. So I ended up finding that inside you take the column which actually has the date column, which is the index column, which is called the plant date, which is that one there, the planted date, the first one at the top there, and the first one, when we read the file, the header is equal to 0, so that's the top line 0, because Python counts from 0 upwards. And then I found these little things that the Lambda functions are like arrow functions inside JavaScript. I really have trouble getting my head around. But the Lambda functions are sort of like, I can write a little function. I could have written that function up here and called it, but basically it says, give me the variable inside the index thing, so that's whatever it is there, takes that thing, and then it's a string, and we're going to subtract the first 4 digits inside there, and take 46 from the end. So I'm left, when I take those and those away, I'm left with July the 6th, 2002. So I just want the date. So I want to manage the date. So I've called that off there, and it's still, and then I've renamed it the same index. So it's putting it into the same place. So it says, take all of this and replace it with just July the 6th, 2022. Then on that column, which is this one here, we're going to call it into a new column. We're going to make another column, but what we're going to do is we're going to remove everything apart from the July, because I've got to somehow change that July into a number, because I can't do anything about converting that to a date until I can get it into a number file. So what I ended up doing was I used a dictionary that just suddenly said, if that number, those first 3 letters are Jan, Feb, Thebob, just replace them with a number. Now, I could have maybe replaced them with a string, which would be 01020304, but I just said, no, let's just make it an integer and a number. So I've replaced it with a number 7. So, sorry, it's done a lookup of July and just suddenly says July is 7, so let's just put it's that. So it does a lookup through there. Then I go through and take the one which actually has this one, so this index column date through here, and I say strip it of the month. So I don't want that month bit there, but I've still got the little gap at the front. And then I'm going to join that date M, and I've created a new column which is the date M minus the month, which has just got the day and the year, and then stick those two together. So I've then got a final string of 7062020. So I've now got that in a number format such that maybe I can convert that into a date. So at this point in time, I'm just deleting those two, and I write it to the original column of which had that long string. I've now just written to it and then just called it 762020. And then I've just blown away, deleted those 2 columns that I created to do the data manipulation through there. Now on the one through here, I can actually have another index column. Because of this particular one here, I've got 2 date columns and they're exactly the same format. Now, the thing is there, you can sometimes get two with the same format, but on this one here, you see suddenly there's gaps in the middle. Now, there's always a date in the first one, but there may not be a date for every single one in the second one. So we can actually manage that through here. Of what I've done in the script through here is if I've got a second date column and it's not empty, then do exactly the same process to alter it so that it looks the same as the other one. But if it's empty, then don't do anything at all. So that's the not equal to going through there. So when it comes through, the first thing I do at this point in time is that I write it to a file. So I normally write it to the same file name, but I just add a prefix onto it, and I usually put an underscore. That means it goes to the top of that the directory of the folder that you're actually working in. So I tend to use underscores and zeros or ones and things like that, so that I can order my files and find them quickly. I don't have to go through and search a massive amount of things to do. So I then call that function through there, and then it creates a file through there. Now what I find is you can use if we go further down with some of these, you can use something like the print the data frame. Like here I've done the printing the data frame, and it prints the bit of the head of the data frame, and it prints a bit of the bottom of the data frame, and then it'll also tell, if you do the info on the data frame, it tells you a bit of it. But I found I couldn't understand these very much. I sort of came from a CSV Excel sort of a thing, so I can actually read a CSV file. So a lot of the times I found it was better to actually just get the CSV and have a look inside it. So when I was actually doing the debugger, Control Z, edit, undo. Oh, it came back. Up last. Del and Del. When I was put it there. Wouldn't you? What was happening to me a lot of the times, I'd get to this point here, I'd have the rest of the code, but it'd break and I'd lose everything, and I don't know what was in the data frame. So instead of actually just putting do a print function at that point in time, I used to actually just move my DF to CSV file to a certain point. So I knew what was actually happening on the line before it broke. So I was suddenly thinking, okay, then I'm just going to send that out to a file, and then I know what's going to happen before this, and I'd maybe call it XXXXX. So when it breaks on the next line, I can actually see what data it had and why it broke. So I can suddenly think, oh, I'm trying to force it to do that, and it won't do that. So I found just printing, I find for me, that worked for me really well. So as I was going through and doing this, I could then suddenly say when it was doing that, I give an error and why the error is, and then I go and search that error to try and see what it was. And a lot of it was the fact, very early on, a lot of it, I had the wrong data types, and so it was trying to do something with one sort of data type and saying, you know, you're trying to add two dates, but they're not dates, they're a different data type. Once I figured out that sort of thing, I was getting more proficient with doing things. So the first one that I do is actually just run it. So if I just run this one and do this, so I've just done the first step, which is to do that. Now again, with this, I could most probably combine these into simplify that, so reduce that down into the number of lines. Generally though, if we just process this one, so if I just go shift and run, it's done, it's there. So it's seriously fast. It's faster than actually opening up an Excel file to actually open up one of these things in the first place. So, and here you see there's the new format through there, and we've still got the original date format through there. So it's just a comparative thing through there. So that's a point where I can now do the second step of the thing. So first of all, I get it into a format that I can use. Then what I've actually done through here is I now read that file, which has got the date in the right format. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the index column the date column. So, and when I actually, so as I read that in, I'm going to make our index column, our date column, the index column, and as we bring it in, we're going to pass it to date. So we force it to change from just a string into a date thing. So when we come through in the next step, we actually change it from just clean data into a date formatted column. So if I now run this script through here and run that, we'll end up with the second file and this shift run. There we go. Where is it? Save, run. There we are. So we got the date column now. So now you see the first one is formatted as date. So if I try and do some date manipulation on that, I can use that because that is now seen that. Now the original, when we look at the original file, because there was no index there to begin, and you're actually talking a data frame, which is basically a matrix and a whole load of rows, it actually puts its own index in here. So it says, I'm going to loop through all the rows and I need to know what the rows are. So it counts 0 down to whatever the last one is through there. So when it does this and it does the next step one through here, it whoops, wrong one. When it does this one here, it still kept the old index. So I've most probably got to go and delete that as well. And it's only transformed this column when I moved it across into a date column through there. So the other one still isn't. So if I go back into my original script right here at the very beginning, instead of saying the second column is nothing, with the second column is grow date, if I run that one through there and we run it and we look through here, you'll see the second date is still as a string. So that's just 7 gap, 27 gap to thing. It's not formatted to this. So, and you'll see that it's got a date time index, not just an index. Whereas if I, how can I find out what? Yeah, no. Yeah, so I'm just wondering whether I can actually do something. No, because I passed it at that point in time. So let's just bring that into there. So if I actually just go there, and if I just go at that point there. So at this point in time, I'm not changing the index column, and I'm not passing that as a date. So if I just run that again, we should actually still get that the range index is there, and a data column. So I've actually got integer, and 2 object ones. So the dates are still being read as strings. So they're objects rather than as a date type. So, and you can see this data range index is there. So it doesn't actually say, well, there's this one here, it says it's a date time index. So it's actually saying it's not an object, it's actually a date time. So type of, so you can then do date manipulations with that through there. So that yeah, so that's what's happening. Now I obviously haven't made the second one through there. It's past the column, the header into there, and that's an exercise. I put these files through here. So I just really wanted to say a bit of a backstory as to where we're going, because we're going to clean this data up, and I'm going to give some examples of some of the challenges I've had with both the API calling, and there's a whole lot of constraints that were put onto that, and I got caught out every which way, and it's really a sort of, these are the experiences that I've had. Everybody, when I go and look up a lot of the things on Python, you do a course and they tend to just have very, very simple things going all the way through, or else the other thing that you end up doing, so you have these simplistic solutions, or they give an example, so it's really just showing an example, so they don't want to make it too busy, or the course courses that I'm doing is sort of like this big overview of what you're doing. This is an actual course of dirty data that I'm going through, and this is a physical things, and these are the methods that I've actually tried to do it. So I'm trying to kind of give a real example on the things and going through, and it also helps me later on for actually coming back and revisiting some of this data and suddenly thinking that's how I approached it there. I've got that information there, so I can easily access it myself. So this one's a little bit of a rambly one. The next ones, hopefully they can be a lot shorter and very focused on the issues that I want to deal with through there. So thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been of use to you. Thank you.